August 17th. John Mott.
To keep going, you must choose to rest. John Mott noted the short blasts of the ship's horn, a sure signal they were nearing port. Soon, he'd step onto English soil, plan a conference, and gather influential students he could empower to share Jesus with the world. Evangelism was a high calling. It was his calling. But at that moment, a slight dizziness blurred his vision. He shook it off. In the 3 years since he'd established the World Student Christian Federation, he'd circled the globe, hosted conferences, and met with student leaders from more countries than he could quickly count. His wife said he hadn't taken a real break in years. The last she could remember was their honeymoon. Sure, weariness dogged him, but when one is called of God, shouldn't he give his all? John's friend, D.W., thought John needed more rest, and he owned many acres of lakefront property in Canada. And what a generous friend. Not only had he offered John's family any plot they wanted, he'd also promised to cut a road to the plot and give John all the logs he needed to build a vacation cabin. But John thought, who had time for such things? The Lord's work needed to be done. John debarked the ship and headed for the site of the next conference. The back-to-back schedule of the upcoming conferences would tax him. They would be intense and far-reaching, but with his daily disciplines of healthy eating, physical exercise, and daily time alone with God, John was confident he could persevere. He always had. John arrived at the conference, offered his smile as he usually did and a warm handshake to the helpers, but then John's head began to swim and spots appeared before his eyes. The next thing he knew, he awoke on the floor with a painful bruise covering the side of his face and one eye. He had fallen, they said, and hit a stand. Somebody had called the doctor, and that wise man had ordered that John stay in bed. John would not be allowed to continue with the conference as he had planned. Diagnosed with a nervous breakdown, he wondered if his years of service to God were over. He couldn't stand that thought. For 10 years, John had trusted his iron constitution, but he'd pushed his body farther and longer than it could sustain. And now he lay in bed, and for the first time in years, he rested, prayed, studied the relationship of periods of rest to staying power in one's work. Eventually, he was strong enough to go home, convinced that God had designed his body for more rest and that it would help rather than harm his ability to serve. John took D.W. up on his offer of a vacation home. On a secluded island in the Canadian wilderness, John built a sturdy family cabin. Throughout the rest of his life, John continued to travel, but each summer, he and his family took extended vacations. No phone, no local telegraph, no easy access. John completely unplugged. He had always worked hard, and that didn't change, but the new John, the one who had learned to rest, kept going strong for the long haul. He clocked nearly 2 million miles of foreign travel and recruited tens of thousands of students to help him spread the gospel of Jesus. His service, fueled by rest, spanned more than half a century, and in 1946, 57 years after the breakdown, John received the Nobel Peace Prize for creating a peace promoting religious brotherhood throughout the world. Mark 6:31 says, "Then Jesus said, 'Let's go off by ourselves to a quiet place and rest for a while.' He said this because there were so many people coming and going that Jesus and his apostles didn't even have time to eat. In a world filled with busyness and distractions, what are you doing to ensure that you will finish strong? To keep going, you must choose to rest.
Hello friends, today is August 17th and our story is about John Mott. My name is Blake Maddox I'm the executive director of 365 Christian Men. Sitting in a beautiful park in Golden, Colorado, surrounded by gigantic trees and a stream in the background, and thinking about what a peaceful place this actually is. And our story today contrasts a peaceful place and a restful place with the challenge to pursue that in our lives. Let me ask you a question for those of you that have tuned in today. How good are you at actually resting? Our story today is about a man who accomplished incredible things. They estimate that he traveled over 2 million miles in his lifetime, in a time when travel was much, much more restricted than it is today. That he raised up some 20,000 missionaries, and by all accounts you would say he lived an amazing and productive life. But yet there came a season when he hit the wall. And when diagnosed about what caused him hitting the wall, it was concluded that he had a nervous breakdown, and it was all connected to lack of rest. You know, God created the world in 6 days. He rested on the seventh. In Mark chapter 6, verse 31, Jesus said to his disciples, "Let's find a place and get away and rest." So here's my challenge for us today. How well do you rest? Do you dedicate time in your life, in your week, to rest? If not, that's a dangerous decision to make. If God rested, if Jesus encouraged rest, we need rest. And so my challenge today is to really consider whether or not you're resting well. You may be working incredibly hard and you may be very productive, but are you working hard at finding time to rest? Rest so you can recover, so you can get refreshed, re-energized, and all of those things that you need to do to be able to go on. So I pray as you consider this and as you have watched this story that you'll really honestly look in the mirror and recognize whether or not you've adapted this discipline to your life or whether or not it's time to do it now. God bless you. Have a great day.